Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. It's Tuesday night of NCAA Tournament week, and it's the final time I'll come to you before Purdue begins its NCAA Tournament on Friday evening against either Texas Southern or Farley Dickinson. There is so much to talk about here today as we look at how Purdue comes into the NCAA tournament, how the East region looks as a pathway to Purdue as they look to reach their first Final Four since 1980. After I talk about the East region a little bit, I'll answer all of your questions. Thank you to all of you guys who sent those in. I always appreciate it so much. This show is better because of the Q&A. So looking forward to that part. And be sure, I've got my hottest take for Purdue as they enter the NCAA tournament here on the show today. So without further ado, guys, it's the most exciting week of the year. Let's get into it real quick. Be sure to follow on Twitter at Boilers Beyond if this is your first time listening. We'll be tweeting there throughout the NCAA tournament Thursday and Friday, and certainly plenty of commentary on Purdue's game or games plural this weekend. So be sure to follow along there and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, because win or lose, we'll be here to break it all down. Purdue, obviously, we talked a little bit on the Sunday night podcast about Purdue's draw in the NCAA tournament. A little bit of some first thoughts. You know the basics here. Purdue gets the winner of Texas Southern or Farley Dickinson. It's going to be Friday evening, a 6:50 tip on TNT. As far as this game goes, I'm not going to claim to be some expert on Texas Southern or Farley Dickinson basketball. I'm just not. What I can tell you is this. I've done some basic research into these teams, and what I know is this. These are the two worst teams in the field of 68 on KenPom. They will play each other tomorrow night in Dayton. So I'm recording this. It's 9:37 right now. So at this time tomorrow, and maybe by the time you're listening to this episode, we will know who Purdue is going to play in the first round. About Texas Southern a little bit. Look, they have the worst record of anyone in the field. They're 14-20, and that includes their 3-game win streak they went on to win the conference tournament, to win the SWAC tournament as the 8 seed. You're probably familiar with seeing Texas Southern in the first 4. It's the 3rd straight year they've been in the Big Dance. They are consistently here, but they're usually a 16 seed. They usually don't have a great record. This year's team's a little bit interesting. They don't shoot it well. They're number 330 nationally in offensive efficiency on KenPom. That's really bad. They shoot 29% from three-point range. That's not very good. 66% from the foul line. Also not very good. It's not a great shooting team, to say the absolute least. They do try to push the tempo a little bit, but they don't shoot it great. As far as Farley Dickinson goes, they're really, really short. They start a 5'8" and 5'9" guard in their backcourt. Their center is smaller than Mason Gillis. So it's going to be a very different look if Purdue were to get Farley Dickinson. Now, they're a team that is going to be able to step out and shoot some threes, including from the center position. How Purdue plays that, that would be a little bit different. But the number that sticks out for Farley Dickinson here, and they are in the 300s on KenPom, they're 3rd to last in the nation in defensive efficiency. Opponents shoot remarkably well against them. They play a pretty aggressive style of defense. They try to force a lot of turnovers, but when they don't turn teams over, they get scored on quite a bit. So that's just kind of where these two teams are at. I know during the episode the other day, I was trying to look for some teams that Purdue had played that are in the ballpark of these teams on KenPom. And as I'm looking right now, I'm still not seeing anything. I kind of forgot to do this. This isn't going to be a great team that Purdue plays in the first round. Purdue probably got a pretty beneficial draw in terms of 16 seeds. Like Farley Dickinson is a little bit better than New Orleans on KenPom, who Purdue beat, and they're right around Austin Peay as well, who Purdue beat despite going 2 for 19 from 3. And then Texas Southern is significantly worse than Milwaukee, who Purdue beat by 30 in the season opener. So there you go, I guess. Again, these are the two worst teams in the field of 68. Purdue should be fine against a 16 seed. Obviously, the last time Purdue was a 1 seed, they had a bit of an adventure against a 16-seeded Western Carolina team. But we'll see what Purdue can do there. Of course, you do look ahead to that second-round matchup where they get either the 8-seed Memphis or the 9-seed Florida Atlantic. And that's where this gets really interesting. I am sure if you're listening to this podcast, you have probably looked around at what some of the basketball writers have to say about the NCAA tournament, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of folks predicting that Memphis will take down Purdue in the second round. There's no doubt that that's a scary matchup. Memphis is a pretty good team. Memphis is playing good basketball. They just went on a run to win their conference tournament. Kendrick Davis is one of the best guards in the country, scores 22 a game. And then DeAndre Williams, who they play at center, is a guy who certainly worries you a little bit, as he can step out and shoot it pretty well from 3 at 43%, takes 2 threes a game. They're a good team. They're going to try to push the tempo. They play very, very fast, 17th fastest pace in the country. They rate fairly well in both offensive and defensive efficiency. Memphis is a team that does worry you a little bit. Now, they allow a ton of offensive rebounds. That's an area where I think Purdue can exploit a little bit. They don't score a ton of their points from the three-point line. They score a ton from inside, and they do shoot a lot of mid-range jumpers. So that's an area where, we've seen Purdue's willing to let teams shoot sometimes if they can cut off the three-point line. That's going to be an interesting matchup if Purdue gets them. But, and I've kind of had this feeling, you see so much Memphis stuff. Sometimes in these 8-9 and these 7-10 games, when the groupthink kind of goes one way, it feels like the result goes the other in reality. And Florida Atlantic's a very capable team. They're 31-3. They're tied for the most wins in the country right now, I believe, with College Charleston. And they're another team. They're inside the top 40 in both offense and defensive efficiency. They're a good shooting team, both inside and outside the arc. They do a lot of good things. Very, very fundamental, very solid team. They haven't played the most grueling schedule, and that's what really sticks out here. Their non-conference strength of schedule was pretty weak. They lost to an Ole Miss team that just fired their coach. They did beat Florida, who is not an NCAA tournament team. But past that, I believe that's it in terms of their power conference opponents this year. Not a particularly strong group. They are certainly going to be a little bit shell-shocked at first seeing potentially Memphis, but certainly Purdue, if they get to that point. They're small. They are, they're much smaller than what most Big Ten teams are. Their guy who starts at the 4 is 6'4", 203. So it's going to be a much smaller matchup, but they're a balanced scoring team, whereas Memphis is very reliant on Kendrick Davis and DeAndre Williams. That second round matchup is kind of critical here. Purdue did not get the most favorable 8-9 draw, but at the same time, if you project forward, I think there are some favorable things in this region. Tennessee's a good team. Tennessee still rates remarkably well in the predictive metrics. Ken Pom still has them number 5 in the country. But, man, they haven't played great basketball late. And if you look at that hypothetical Sweet 16 matchup, Tennessee and Duke are the 4-5 seed there. Duke is a much different team than the team that Purdue played out in Portland back in November. They've gotten a lot better since then, as most teams that rely heavily on freshmen do. It's going to be interesting there because Duke has a tough game right off the bat with Oral Roberts. I mean, we saw what Oral Roberts could do in the NCAA tournament 2 years ago in Indianapolis when they went on a run to the Sweet 16. They can be dangerous. So I think you have an all right Sweet 16 matchup. Duke is the one that probably scares you the most, but you've beat them already. That doesn't guarantee anything, but it means something. You look all the way out to a hypothetical Elite Eight, looking at the bottom half of the bracket here in the East region, and you have Marquette, you have Kansas State, you have Kentucky. It's interesting that you've already played Marquette too. And who would have thought? You look back at the start of the season when Purdue and Marquette were set to play in the Gavitt games for the third time in the last 6 years, and you think, Purdue-Marquette again. Purdue was picked 5th in the Big Ten, Marquette 9th in the Big East. And I remember looking at Ken Pom, and Marquette was like in the 70s for that game. Not anymore. Not anymore, they're not. Marquette is really good. They had an awesome season. They're up to 12 in Ken Pom now. Marquette's a really, really solid team. That would be a tough one. I'm not sure about Kansas State, but I think Kentucky's dangerous, and you might want to just ignore me on that because every single year I put Kentucky too far in my bracket. I think last year I might have had them winning the whole thing, and then they lost to St. Peter's. So I don't know that maybe I should completely count on Kentucky getting far, but I do worry about them. Oscar Tshiebwe matching up with Zach Edey would be must-see TV. But nonetheless, you look at what Purdue has in the East region here, and starting in the round of 32, it's going to be a battle. Purdue is going to have to beat 3 really good teams in a row to do what the fans are desperate for, to do what the players are desperate for, to do what the coaching staff is desperate for, and that is get to the first Final Four since 1980. There are still a lot of things to like about Purdue. Right now, if you judged Purdue by some of the reactions that you see on the message boards and on Twitter, you probably would have thought Purdue didn't win the Big Ten tournament. Because there's a lot of negativity for a team that finished 29-5, winning the Big Ten regular season by 3 games and winning the Big Ten tournament while getting a 1 seed for the first time in 27 years. There's a lot of negativity for that. Purdue still has the best player in the country. There are plenty of remarkably dangerous players in this region. You look at Kendrick Davis. You look at Kyle Filipowski. You look at Max Asmus. How about a guy like Tyler Kolek, like Oscar Tshiebwe, Keontae Johnson? There are some really, really good players in the East region. Zach Edey's better than all of them. He's going to win National Player of the Year. Nothing has changed, though, if you look at some of the reasons for concern. It's like you've heard all year. Purdue has the young guards, and that's not going to change. That was never going to change. So, they've survived about every fire that Purdue's thrown them in this year, and they've come out unscathed. What are they going to do now? I don't know. Purdue is still very centered around one player. Is that typically a recipe for success in March? Maybe, maybe not, but it's not always the worst thing to have your go-to guy. I don't think that's a terrible thing. They still have the tendency, and this is what concerns me more than the young guards and more than relying so heavily on one player. It's the tendency to go into these stretches where the turnovers come in waves, and it's not a full court press thing even. If you look at Northwestern, it came against a full court press, but just in general, Purdue gets in these stretches where they can turn it over on 3 or 4 straight possessions. And in the NCAA tournament, that can bury you quick. If the other team scores on those 3-4 possessions and you look at an 8-12-0 run, then you're in trouble. Purdue has the tendency to miss tons of open threes. Purdue's probably not going to be able to have a game like they did on Sunday against Penn State where they go 6 for 28 from 3. If that happens in the NCAA tournament after the first round, I think the chances are that will be the end of Purdue's season. Whether that's in the round of 32, whether that's in the Final Four, I don't know, but I think a performance like that, you really open the door to losing at any point. None of those things are going to change. Purdue has been unbelievable all season. 29-5. If they win both their games this weekend, this team will have won more games than any team in Purdue history. They have kind of vindicated everything from last year. They've accomplished what they couldn't last season. Now, can they go do it in the NCAA tournament? We're about to find out. My hot take before I get into the Q&A here. If Purdue survives that round of 32 game, if they can get past Memphis or Florida Atlantic, Purdue's going to make the Final Four. That's my hot take here. I think that's a very worrisome matchup in the round of 32. But if you can get past that, I like enough what they would have in the Sweet 16 Elite 8 that I think they can move on to Houston and make the Final Four. All right, now that that's over, let's get into the Q&A here. And the first one, do you have any expectation that Fletcher Loyer is going to play well for Purdue in the NCAA tournament? Look, I mean, there's no secret that Fletcher Loyer is struggling right now. He is in a remarkable cold stretch for Purdue to the point where, I think it's exceeded just your normal cold stretch, and I think it's probably in his head pretty good. How could it not be? Is kind of the real question. I think at some point that's just kind of inevitable. But do I have any expectation that he plays well? I don't know. Expectation's a tough word because I don't know what to expect from anyone really. Outside of Zach Edey, sometimes that's kind of hard. But Fletcher Loyer has played well at times this year. He's played really well. You look at what he did out at PK 85. He had a great stretch there against Gonzaga and Duke. He played phenomenally in both the games against Nebraska, 22 and 27. Had a nice game against Penn State in the Palestra. Purdue doesn't win that game in East Lansing on Martin Luther King afternoon without Fletcher Loyer. Zach Edey had the stats that, everyone kind of took and ran with, and he certainly won Purdue the game. But Fletcher Loyer was huge for them. So he's capable of doing it. Can he snap out of it? Yes, but it's not easy. Being a freshman, getting into this season down late, you're a little bit worn out. I know he's not been 100% healthy, so we'll see. But can he play well? He absolutely can. Will he? We'll see if he can get that shot back. That's what it comes down to. Does David Jenkins need to play like this for Purdue to make a Final Four? I don't know that it has to be David Jenkins Jr. specifically, but Purdue needs someone on the perimeter to be playing at a pretty high level to make the Final Four. I think Braden Smith is someone who needs to play really well because he's going to have the ball in his hand so much. Obviously, Zach Edey needs to be the National Player of the Year, but they need a third guy to play at a pretty high level. Whether that's Brandon Newman, whether that is David Jenkins Jr., Fletcher Loyer. I think even Mason Gillis could maybe be that guy, although he doesn't create a ton of his own shots. But someone has to be playing at a really high level out there besides Braden Smith and Zach Edey for Purdue to make the Final Four. David Jenkins is playing his best basketball of the year at the best time possible. So he was probably an easier guy to point to and say he can be that guy. But I don't think it has to be him, no. How will Zach Edey guard a center that can shoot threes? Seems like that will be the case if Memphis beats Florida Atlantic and Purdue beats Farley Dickinson or Texas Southern. Yeah, this is kind of what we've seen is the weakness, is if Zach Edey can get pulled out, and then you can see a big either shoot over him or put the ball on the floor and get around him, or you at least get Zach Edey out of the middle, and it makes driving easier for other players on the offensive team. But the key, and I don't know the context of Memphis's numbers well enough to really gauge how good of shooters some of these guys are or aren't. But the question is, can you put Zach Edey on a non-shooter and just kind of sag off of him? Like, this is what Purdue has done to Iowa the last few years with Connor McCaffrey. And it's the most disrespectful thing in the damn world, but Connor McCaffrey doesn't make threes against Purdue. He's gotten better as a shooter at Iowa throughout his career, but he had like 3 air balls at Mackey Arena this year. Purdue will put the big man on the non-shooter and just sag off. And with DeAndre Williams, he's sized where Caleb First or Mason Gillis could probably guard him. And if he's got the ball in the block, you can bring a double. You can do different things there. But that's kind of the key. If you can't hide Zach Edey on a non-shooter, then you just kind of have to deal with it and hope that he doesn't make a lot of them. But if Zach Edey can switch off and you can play the 4 on the center that can shoot, then that's going to be the most successful strategy of dealing with it if you're Purdue. How do you think Purdue performs against Memphis or FAU? And how do you think the draw is with Purdue having Memphis, Duke, Michigan State, Marquette, Kentucky, and Tennessee in their bracket? Obviously, I think, and this is a question here coming up as well, who should Purdue be cheering for in Florida Atlantic, Memphis? I mean, I think you want Florida Atlantic to win that game if you're Purdue. Neither matchup is going to be a cakewalk by any means, but I would take Florida Atlantic just because they don't have the star power of Memphis. They don't have the two-headed monster that is Kendrick Davis and DeAndre Williams. So, I think Florida Atlantic's the more advantageous matchup. I think Purdue can beat either of them. Purdue's going to be favored against either of them. And if Purdue doesn't shoot poorly and doesn't turn the ball over a bunch, then I think they will beat either of them. But it's the kind of back of mind deal that that Purdue could go cold, and then it does worry you a little bit. But Purdue's going to be the better team coming into either of those games. What they do, time will tell. And in terms of the bracket draw, it's fine. Marquette was the number 8 overall seed, I believe. So you got the worst 2 with you. Kansas State at the 3, I think you'll take. I think that's a good one. I think Tennessee at the 4, just being banged up without Zakai Ziegler, that's a team without their best guard. So I think that's probably a favorable draw. Duke, and then the 8-9 game is where it gets difficult. But look, you're not going to make a Final Four without having to beat good teams. That's just not how this works. So I don't think Purdue has much to complain about here. I think Purdue's just got to kind of strap it up and go out there and see if they can get it done. Of the teams that Purdue could play in their region, what team are you most worried about? And the listener says, mine would probably be Memphis with their athletic guards. And then a similar question, best and worst potential matchups for Purdue in their region. Memphis scares me. Memphis, as I've discussed, Memphis scares me. Marquette is going to be a difficult game if it were to get to that. It's really hard to sit here and project out the Elite Eight, especially in a season where we've seen college basketball be very unpredictable and where it feels like there is no one dominant team. Maybe Alabama has a claim to that, maybe not, but Marquette would be tough. Kentucky would be interesting with Shibwe. And Duke has certainly gotten better, and they have a lot of size there. Derek Lively's playing a lot better. Kyle Filipowski's a really good player. They're a scary team. I think Tennessee you match up all right with. I think Kansas State you match up all right with. And then, if you get a team like, someone goes on a run like Oral Roberts or Louisiana or a low seed from the bottom, then maybe this year you can take advantage of that matchup. I don't know, but I think as a whole, Memphis is the one team that jumps out initially that scares you. Would Tennessee or Duke be a better Sweet 16 matchup? I think Purdue would want Tennessee there just because they aren't a great offensive team and they've not seen anything like Zach Edey this year. They're a great defensive team, and that certainly raises its concerns. They force a ton of turnovers. Opponents don't shoot well against them, but I think you'll take your chances against a team that itself is not a great offensive team. I think you'll take that. Whereas Duke is playing their best basketball at this time of the year, and that gets a little bit scary with a team with as much talent as Duke has. This was a good one. This was a really interesting one because, as you know, all the conversation the last 2 weeks had been about seeding and where Purdue wanted to be. Knowing the brackets, would you take Purdue's number 1 in the East for Arizona's number 2 in the South? Look, as I've said all year, I am going to take the number 1 seed every time. I read it today in The Athletic. A number 1 seed will make the NCAA tournament, will make the Final Four about 41% of the time, whereas if you're a 2 seed, it drops to like 21%. Give me those odds. Now, in terms of a second round matchup, Like you look at Arizona, I think Missouri's scary. And then in the Sweet 16, I think Baylor's scary if you're Purdue. So is Creighton probably, because these teams are very guard heavy and can really get after it, playing at a high tempo. So I think Purdue probably has a little bit better of a draw there. Alabama is really good, and that would be your hypothetical Elite Eight game. So I'll take Purdue's draw over that. Now, would it be advantageous to be in Louisville? Absolutely. If Purdue gets to the second weekend, you look at the potential of playing Duke in New York City. There would be a ton of Duke fans there. You would be at a crowd disadvantage. And then if you were to play certainly Kentucky in the Elite Eight, you'd be at a crowd disadvantage. You could play Kentucky anywhere in the world, and you would probably be at a crowd disadvantage. But like Marquette in New York, okay. Kansas State in New York, okay. Tennessee, okay. That's kind of where I stand on that. So give me the 1 seed every time. How many Big Ten teams do you think will make the round of 32? And then how many in the Sweet 16? I don't have my bracket in front of me right now. I think I had 3 Big Ten in the round of 32. I think I have Northwestern winning, and I think I have someone else. Penn State. I think I have Penn State winning. But yeah, I mean, it's not a great... I mean, the Big Ten has a lot of 7 through 10 seeds, so that gets really difficult. Like Iowa against Auburn and Birmingham, no thanks. Illinois against Arkansas, no thanks. Kent State, Indiana is going to be really interesting. I could see Kent State winning that, and I could see Indiana blowing them out. I don't know, but the Big Ten is desperate for NCAA tournament success. It's been a long time, and I have Purdue as the only Big Ten team making the second weekend. Best bet of round 1? I'm liking Furman over Virginia right now. That's just kind of the little trendy pick that I'm into a little bit, but I don't know. Like, I don't have the point spreads in front of me here. I was just listening to a podcast, and they think Houston could beat Northern Kentucky by like 40 or 50. So maybe you just lay the points there. It's realistic. Maybe like the over in Iowa-Auburn, just because Iowa's going to launch. But I don't know. I don't bet on a ton of college basketball, so I don't know that I have a best bet. But maybe look at Furman there against Virginia. And then finally, the last question here. What's the best viewing atmosphere for March Madness? Is it being at home for all 4 days? Is it a bar for 1 or 2 of the days? Do you send the wife on a 4-day vacation? Need thoughts. So it really depends on what your TV situation at home is and what the TV situation at a bar would be, right? If you've got the TVs to go, 4 TVs in your living room, then it's going to be tough to beat that. You've got the comfort of your own home. You're buying a case of beer for the price of like 4 beers at the bar. That's a good deal. You can do whatever you want for food. That's always nice. Don't have to deal with other people. That can be great. But if you don't have the best TV set up at home, or you want to go out, you just want to go somewhere where there are going to be a ton of TVs, where you know that someone is monitoring the TVs. You don't have someone falling asleep at the wheel, where they don't have the TVs on the right spot, or they don't have a good mix. Like, you want to have if you can have 4 screens, or at least 3 screens, you want to have these all in one view, where you don't have to turn your body, turn your head to look at the different games. You want to be able just to kind of glance over and know what's going on in all 4 games if possible. Staying at home is probably the safe pick, but if you want to go out, just make sure you're going somewhere that you trust. That's kind of the key, if you ask me. But look, it's the best couple days of the year. It is a blast. Nothing beats it. Nothing beats the NCAA tournament. It is so random. It is so fluky. It is remarkable what happens during this event. That's what makes it great. And that's what's going to make the next few days some of the best of the year. So that's all I have for today. And that's all I have leading into the NCAA tournament. I'll be back here. I'm not planning to do an episode after the round of 64 game, Purdue versus 16 seed. If something major happens, I will be back here. If not, I will probably plan on coming to you after Purdue's round of 32 game, given that they win the first round game. So that's kind of the plan. Obviously, that's subject to an audible, but be sure to follow along on Twitter at Boilers Beyond. Come join the conversation throughout it all, and be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss the next episode, because there will be plenty to talk about no matter what happens. Until then, guys, take care and enjoy the games.